Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And today's guest is Tony Moreau, who's the CEO and director of American Eagle Gold, a junior miner focusing on exploring for world-class gold and copper deposits in North America. And they have a flagship asset called NAC, copper gold property located in British Columbia. Tony's a Chartered Financial Analyst, and has worked in a variety of positions for IAM Gold, and more recently in a business development and innovation capacity. But apart from his role with American Eagle Gold, he also leads the Young Mining Professionals Toronto chapter, and also is the co-chair of the YMP Scholarship Fund. And obviously we're going to those a little bit later in the podcast. And today's going to talk about the company, and also about some of the latest news and topics that is happening in the mining industry. So let's welcome Tony to the podcast. How you doing, Tony?
Rob, I'm good. Now that I'm talking to you, thanks a lot for having me on.
No, and I appreciate your time. I know you're an avid listener, so you know how this goes. I wonder if you can just tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I live in Toronto. We run a small junior mining company. It's called American Eagle Gold. We trade AE on the TSX Venture. We got a great asset. It's in British Columbia. We were pretty much dead before we started drilling this project last year, and we were literally on, in a coma, I like to say. And then all of a sudden we got like a Pulp Fiction shot of adrenaline and came back to life. Our stock went up 10x overnight, and everyone kind of found out about us. Our drill program was extremely, it was very good. But, like all juniors, we have our ups and downs, and we had some financing issues, etc. But, we're about to start drilling again, and we got a lot of blue sky ahead and a really great property with a really great team. And, besides American Eagle Gold, the one thing I'm proud of is, avid community member in the youth mining scene in Toronto, and we started a scholarship fund 5 years ago that we grew over 20x since then. So I just love this industry. You get to see the world, you get to help the world, and hopefully make some money along the way.
Yeah, certainly. So I just wondering if you can give us a quick snapshot of American Eagle Gold.
Yeah, we got copper, gold, porphyry near Smithers, Ontario. Smithers is in interior BC. The great thing about where we are, it's called the Babine Porphyry District. Everyone would think of BC, they think of the Golden Triangle, and the Golden Triangle is great. But the Babine region, they're mining there long before the Golden Triangle. Noranda mined, which eventually became Glencore. They mined there starting in the 60s until the early 90s at two mines called Bell and Grand Isle. Surface deposits, really good mines. But since then there really hasn't been a lot of exploration and a lot of mining at all. And since then, the Golden Triangle has been kind of the hot topic in the region. But sitting there was the Babine region where we are. And yes, the Golden Triangle has some great deposits, really great deposits. But the thing about the Babine, you want to be in a great jurisdiction with a friendly local government, which we are in Canada, and with a lot Lake Babine Nation, we have really good community support. But Rob, also what you need is you want really great infrastructure. It's one thing I talked about being a good jurisdiction, but you also want to have your CapEx to be as small as possible. So the cost is low. Also, the time to get to production is also the smallest. And that comes with great infrastructure, which, Gold Triangle is great, but you got to fly in there, helicopter. They got a lot of First Nations issues. Where we are in the Babine region, you can drive a semi right up to our property. It's only 1,000 meters above water. It's great temperature. You can drill there all through the year. We're 50 kilometers away from a great campsite. We call it Howard Johnson or a Holiday Inn. That's how great it is. People want to work where we are. But the problem is nobody had really done any work in the Babine region. So it's kind of like forgotten, like an old teddy bear in someone's closet. And I think we brought a lot of the attention back into the region. And why no one drilled in this region, it's really funny. It's just because the infrastructure wasn't there. So because of the logging economy, logging built the infrastructure. So now you can drill onto a camp. So before, when the last people explored, in the mid 90s, you had to fly helicopters in, which means it was very expensive. The other thing is copper was at 60 cents a pound in the mid 90s during the last time the big drilling campaign happened at NAC. And gold was at $400 an ounce. So if you want to make a mine work, it better have been close to surface and it better have been high grade. So there was a lot of drilling here historically, but they didn't really find that high grade surface deposit, but they drilled over a wide region. The other thing, Rob, that's really funny is a lot of companies are just lazy, and there's a lot of work done on these properties, but because the work went down back to the 60s, a lot of it was monologue, which means it was on paper. So when companies came in there, they did their own little data sets, geophysics, geochem, drilling, but they didn't really analyze all the previous data, which really helps a lot. Because if you have one data set that shows there's a target, you might drill there. If there's two, you'll probably drill there. If there's five, you'll drill there for sure. But there are 5 data sets that we had access to, but no one had digitized all of it. So the group that we bought the project off, they did the easy work, but it's actually the hard work where they spent a year and just digitized everything. They scanned it, they put it on the computer, they looked at everything. And when they're doing this, they didn't even know if they'd find anything. So it's one thing doing all that work, knowing you'll find, kind of a pot at the end of the rainbow, but they didn't know what they're going to find. It could have been a big waste of time. But what they saw was every single data set showed a really great target, geophysical anomaly. And the person that found our deposit, I've said the story many times, but this guy was a great man. His name was Gary Artmont. He was my uncle. I loved him very much. Always looked up to him. He's the reason why I got in the mining industry. When I was 4 years old, he was working for Grasberg. He brought back a wife from Indonesia. We saw him once or twice a year. He was like a legend to us, and always heard about stories of him traveling all over the world. He was part of the discovery team for Grasberg. So he did the original mapping at Grasberg, which is one of the most economical mines in the world up there, El Teniente, Escondida, etc. And he told me, he said, listen, you can have great targets. It doesn't guarantee you anything, but that's really the only thing you can start from in terms of exploration. And it's all about making that that haystack as small as possible, because everyone says, finding a big discovery is like finding a needle in the haystack. You got to make that haystack as small as possible to make the probability as high as possible for investors. Because for investors to get in this game, look, the odds are stacked against you. The odds are the stock will probably go back down to the pennies. But if you get in the right one, you can have a 10, 20, 100x, Rob, which makes up for all these other losers. And we think we really do have a winner here. So that's how we came across the property. We're really excited about it. A lot of things have changed since then. Obviously, gold and copper are a lot higher. Also, because of the prices of these metals, the way that people explore for these metals are a lot different. So if you look at Escobal, that's in South America, owned by Sol Gold. You look at Red Chris. You even look at the local saddle discovery for GT Gold. Those big porphyry discoveries, they were found because copper was at $4 a pound, $3.50 a pound. So it made sense to explore deep. And the top of those porphyries really started at 600 meters. And if you look at the 20,000 meters of drilling at our property, the deepest drill hole, I think, went to 400 meters in vertical depth. The average drill hole went to 175 meters. So people really were just scratching the tip of the iceberg, and 200 meters above really the high point of where we think this porphyry is. So our plan was, listen, we want to be the Brett Favre of mining companies. Go for it. And we did 7 deep drill holes. Our very first drill hole, we hit high grade right off the top, high grade copper and gold. It was absolutely amazing. It'd be a good drill result for any copper or gold company. But what was really interesting is we hit stuff really deep, and we hit high grade, and we hit stuff called bornite and chalcocite. And that made us realize that there really is a beast underneath somehow, but we got to rely on some more geophysics and our geology team to help us vector into where to drill, because there's a lot of smoke on our property. There's a lot of disseminated mineralization, but there's a fire underneath, and we got to drill in that fire. And the analogy I always say, I drink a cappuccino every day. So you have a sip of that cappuccino, you hit the froth, but what you really want is that espresso underneath. And the froth kind of tastes a little bit like coffee. And that's kind of the analogy with these porphyries. At the surface, there's a lot of disseminated ore. A lot of times it's low grade, but there's some Nespresso underneath. And one thing I do know, I'm not a geologist, it doesn't rain copper. When you got that much ore, there's got to be a high grade source, a heartbeat coming somewhere. So we kind of identified there is a heartbeat somewhere. We just hit some of the veins, but we're looking for the heart this year, and we think we can have a good chance at hitting it. And once that happens, that's why I'm in the industry. It's called $1 billion drill hole for a reason, and we're out there to find it, and we want investors to invest with us.
And obviously, your knack property. How did you find it, and why should investors be excited about it?
Well, like I said, my uncle showed it to us, luckily, because we failed in Nevada, or he knew we were going to fail. And, he just said, look, it's a great target, second best target I've ever seen outside of Grasberg. And, we took it on. I saw a lot of things that investors see right now. They saw, a lot of historical grade and a lot of historical, average grade in drilling. So if 7 different companies have been there before, there's a good chance it's not going to happen. But if you look at any of the major mines that have been discovered recently, those have all been explored for years with many different companies. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to find something. In fact, it actually gives you a better chance to find things because you got a lot of data to work on and a lot of data that you don't have to spend money on with geophysics and geochem. So, why would investors invest in us? Look, we already had a really successful drill program. We're drilling in a really, crappy market last year. I believe our stock should be a lot higher. We have a really great team. Look, you want to, big ore bodies, hang out with big ore bodies, but you also want the geologist that has a track record of success of finding those ore bodies. And our main geologist, his name's Neil Prowse. He's a protege of Charlie Gregg, who's our technical advisor. And Charlie Gregg and Neil Prowse both worked on GT Gold. Charlie was one of the founders of GT Gold, and GT Gold was the $400 million saddle deposit they sold to Newmont. That's just in the Golden Triangle northwest of us, and he was in charge of that program, and he found it. So again, we got the guy that knows how to find the deposit in a really great jurisdiction with great infrastructure. Also, Rob, we got no financing ahead of us. So if I'm investing in a junior company, what I always look at, what's in the treasury? Are they going to raise more money, trick us, and all of a sudden the stock goes down because they have to do a discount? Well, heck no. Like we have almost $5 million in our bank. We're fully funded for this year, even for next year for drilling. So we really just have blue sky. We have a lot of catalysts ahead. We got drilling coming up starting in a couple of weeks. That means we have assays coming out for the next 6 months. The problem with this industry, again, I've said it many times, but there's a lot of different companies out there. Last time I checked, there's 966 junior mining companies on the TSX Venture. That doesn't count in Australia, Europe, etc. And there's, around 966 CEOs. And every other CEO, God bless them, they all think that they have the best asset. And, if you're a junior mining investor, how are you going to get through all this white noise? How do you know that, company A is better than company B? And geology, I've been doing this for 12 years. Geology still, I still don't quite understand it. And it's like rocket science to a lot of people. So what people do is they rely on experts. They rely on letter writers, analysts to tell them where to invest. And a lot of these letter writers and analysts, they have ulterior motives. Maybe they're front running a stock, so they'll buy the stock and then they'll give a recommendation to buy it, so the stock will go up on their investment. Other ones, a lot of them, you got to do sponsorships. You got to pay people to talk about you. The very best marker, the very best way to get credibility for your company, do you know what it is? It's having
What's
a big
that?
company invest in you. So a letter writer might spend 3 weeks talking to you guys. If you give them money, you might not spend any time. We had an investment from Teck, and they didn't invest in us. Maybe the bit of them they invested in us because they believed we would spend their money and explore, but they loved our property. They went to the site. We've been talking to Teck for 6 months. They've seen all the core. They met our team. They met the community, etc. And they decided to put $3 million in us because of our property. And all of a sudden, if I'm an investor now scanning through all these different properties, I'd be like, well, Teck, that is a company that really knows exploration. They really know mining. And if they like NAC, there must be something there. And they'll look at the valuation of our company. It's just over $10 million. So there's a lot of upside there. Look at Teck. They're part of the discovery of Hemlo. They're an early investor in Diamond Fields that became Voisey's Bay. That's Robert Friedland's baby. New Afton has been through many different owners. New Gold's the most recent owner, shared with the Toronto Teachers Plan. Their original, they're part of that old New Afton region discovery. So they have a big track record of results. So what I would say is, look, Tech's willing to take a shot on NAC. I would be too. So that's what I'd be showing investors. And, not a lot of downside, a lot of upside, a lot of news ahead. So just brace yourself, put on your seatbelts, and get ready for the ride.
Yeah, obviously you've got a big vision for the company. So how do you take a junior mining company to a multi-million dollar mining company.
You say multi-million or multi-billion?
Multi-billion.
Multi-billion. Wow. I think first of all, you take it one step at a time. It's always good to have a plan, in place of how to get there, but you also want to set your sights on this year. So I think it's just putting in the right work, having a really successful drill program. And for us to get to that next level, it's just identifying more of the high grade material. It's also identifying more of the scale and size of the deposit. One of the challenges I've had is just having investors know about our company. And, when you saw our second drill result came out, it was better than our first hole. So if you look at our first hole, what investors always cared about was 135 meters of 1.05% copper equivalent. But if you look at it from the first 300 meters, which is what makes a mine, that's 300 meters of 0.56% copper equivalent. Our second hole was 300 meters of 0.61. But because we just put out our whole hole, people just look at the title of the news release, they see 0.37, and they think it's low grade and they sell. And investors don't even look at anything below your title. But what big companies look for, they love grade, like investors do, but the most important thing to them is that 900 meters of 0.37 copper equivalent they have. They like scale and they like bornite because it's easier to process. And if you look at our plan this year, we had to drill along a fence this year. We hit on every single hole, all 7 holes. We drill along a fence. We couldn't even step out because of our permits. And this year we have a 5-year permit. We can drill all over the property, and we're doing some step outs. But what we're doing is we're actually stepping out almost a kilometer southeast underneath the south intrusive zone. And if we hit that, it is off to the races because it'll show we have like world-class jurisdiction size scale here. So, this year we hit something big. I expect our market cap to increase. I don't never like to give a dollar amount or market cap amount, but the dream is to get to $1 billion and sell us to another company these days. And if you're an investor looking at any company, you're like, I want to see a roadmap for how I can get there. And, I talked about Teck in terms of them being the ones that show that they like the property, but, it already shows that they put a foothold in their company. So it'd be like a company like Teck that we'd eventually, hopefully, sell to someday. And look, I'm not gonna lie to investors and say we're gonna build this mine someday. It's almost impossible to build a great mine on time and on budget. I worked at a mining company for 10 years. Their job was to build mines, and it was very difficult for them to do. So I'm not going to lie and say we're going to build this mine. We want to advance this project as much as possible, increase shareholder value as much as possible, and create a liquidity event so shareholders can get out of their shares and make money and invest in another company. And look, for us too, why we partner with Teck, if we're going to hand the baton off to someone, we want to make sure it was someone that had a great culture, great experience with the community. And if we're going to hand that baton off someday, if we do, Teck would be a great partner to take it on and hold the baton and bring it to the finish line. But the plan is to be many, many X times bigger than where we are right now, and hopefully create a liquidity event. But look, someday if we develop this, I would be surprised. So I don't think the plan is to ever build a mine.
You went public and started, obviously, the company based on your Nevada asset. But then you got rid of it within about a year. Just wondering what that process, how you went through that process, and obviously the actual reason and decision to get rid of that asset.
Yeah, it was a whirlwind. So we had a project in Nevada. It was I mentioned earlier, you need big ore bodies, hang with big ore bodies, and we're next to one of the biggest ore bodies in the world. We had this project. It was right attached to the Cortez facility, which is Newmont Barrick's JV, right next door to Gold Rush, which is Barrick's newest mine that's coming online. And we had the geologists actually help make the discovery for Gold Rush. So we're really excited. And that's why we started in Nevada. That's why people invested in us originally. But what happened there was a complete disaster. One of the biggest misnomers or misunderstandings about this industry, I just saw the Nielsen rankings, not the Nielsen, the whatever those rankings are for the best mining jurisdiction. And they said Nevada.
Fraser Institute,
that's it. Nielsen's for the TV. Yeah, Fraser Institute said Nevada's number one. And I found that kind of comical. Nevada's a great place to be if you're mining. If you're Barrick or Newmont, it's great because they let you do your thing, etc. But if you gotta be an exploration company, it is as tough as possible. I would, like, personally for me, I would never go back to Nevada to explore. If you want to find a deposit in reality, it's about putting as many drill holes in the ground as possible, because the chances are most of those drill holes are going to be dusters, and you want to hit that drill hole to identify where the mineralization is, so you get more drill holes around it. But the only way you put a lot of drill holes in there is get the cost to drill as cheap as possible. And the drill in Nevada for us, it was close to $1,000 US dollars per meter. And we might as well have been on the moon or in Congo or Russia or China for that cost. So and why it's so expensive there, it's many different reasons. One of them is, in Nevada, unlike a lot of other jurisdictions, they charge by the hour. So in BC, when we're doing our drill contract, we have a contract and they charge us per meter. There's a certain price for overburden, there's a certain price per meter when you get down to a certain spot, but you can figure out pretty much within 5% what your budget's going to be. In Nevada and a lot of the states, they charge per hour. So if you hit bad ground, you have a bad site team, like you can just blow up your budget all of a sudden. And it's one of the costs of being in Nevada. Also, where we are in the Cortez region, the Carlin region, it's extremely tough ground to keep open, tough ground to drill. And your cost is reflective of how fast you put those drills into the ground. And it's very slow drilling where we are in Nevada. It's through about 1,000 meters of overburden. And the other thing that's really tough is you got Newmont and Barrick right next door. So again, you want to be close to big ore bodies, but again, Barrick kept on. So they split everything. I think it's about 2/3 Barrick, 1/3 Newmont, or 62-38 for that whole JV of the Carlin region. But Barrick's extremely smart. And I can talk about Mark Bristol later, but they carved out that Gold Rush property of theirs, and they have a property called 4 Mile. And 4 Mile just drilled, I believe, about 40 meters of about an ounce per ton. And I guess what I'm getting at here is the cost of capital to drill as a junior company is so high, it almost doesn't even make sense. It almost makes more sense to acquire. And all of a sudden now we're competing against, major drill, against Newmont and Barrick, who hired all the drillers nearby, and they don't care what they pay per hour. They'll pay $2,000 per meter in the ground if they know they're going to get, 40 meters of an ounce per ton. So you're competing against, Barrick and Newmont. They've cornered all of the drillers, and all of a sudden, if you get a driller, you're paying Barrick and Newmont's price, and all of a sudden you actually have like the 4th best team on there. So that's what we kind of happened when we started drilling there. And what you got to realize with Barrick and Newmont, the thing about mid-tiers and major mining companies, it's all about reserve replacement. So when you produce gold, you got to replace that gold or replace more of it. They produced about 3.5 million ounces of gold in about the size of an area the size of Delaware. So they got to replace that. So they're drilling. I think the last time I checked when we were there, they had about 25 drillers that they had under control. So we couldn't access any of them. Anyways, to make a long story short, we failed. We hit a duster. We had to TD our hole halfway in. And my chairman said, look, Tony, this is tough to swallow, but sometimes the best investments you make are the stocks you sell at a 50% down as opposed to selling 100% down. And there's 2 main rules about junior mining. You got to look after your cap structure. And if you're going to fail fast. So I think within 10 months, Rob, we just left Nevada. We weren't going to even pay another $100,000, $200,000 to keep that property in good standing, to pay for the geologist, to pay for any geophysics. We just didn't like the economics of it. We didn't like the cost of capital, and we're going to leave. Luckily, my uncle introduced this property in BC to us, so we had something to fall back on. And we had a little bit of more money in the coffers. We drilled on it. We hit a really great discovery. We raised a little bit more money off that, and we're able to continue and change our story altogether. So that's kind of how we went from Nevada to BC, and kind of a bit of a lesson on Nevada in general. Again, it's a great mining jurisdiction. I wouldn't say it's a great exploration jurisdiction.
What's some of the biggest, or what is the biggest challenge you face as a CEO of a junior miner?
Biggest challenge for me is just to keep yourself in the news and have people know who you are. So, this isn't like a Coke versus Pepsi, like 2 brands there. I'm competing against 1,000 other brands. And, it's just about being in the investor's mindset, knowing that they can invest in you. So, it's about distribution for us. It's about people knowing AE is our ticker, American Eagle Gold is our name, which is a real challenge. The one thing about investors, I mentioned earlier, geology is almost like rocket science, but I even fall into this rule. Like, I was looking for a camera the other day, Rob. Do you know how much time I spent before I went to Best Buy to invest in this camera? Probably 6 hours. I put $5,000 in another junior company. Do you know how much time I spent researching this company? About half an hour. So, people don't have a lot of time. They don't understand mining. And there's a lot of mining companies out there. So the biggest challenge is having investors know that they can even invest in you. And honestly, that's, I mentioned tech, like honestly, they gave us the big stamp of approval of our property. But the big thing about tech, why I was really excited about it, was tech is well known throughout the world. So all of a sudden now, because of all the stuff going on with Glencore and tech and them being in the news, people in Japan, people in China, people in Europe can all of a sudden hear about us, because people every day, these funds, they're Googling tech. Is there something new happening on Glencore? Is there something new happening on? And all of a sudden one day some person in Japan will Google our name and up pops American Eagle Gold. And all of a sudden that investor knows about American Eagle Gold. It's just about having as many people as possible know about you. Because if you start with a really big circle of investors, say it's 5 million, you dwindle that down less and less and less and less. And then all of a sudden you have a really small bubble of people that can actually invest. You want to get that small bubble with as many people as possible. So my job every day is figuring out how can we get as much distribution as possible. How can we get as many eyeballs on us as possible? So when we do have good news, people will press the buy button.
Obviously, you mentioned there's a lot of mining juniors out there, and there's a lot of underperforming mining companies. What would you say is their main pitfall that they actually make?
My old CEO, Steve Letwin, really smart guy, one of my role models. He just said, always protect your balance sheet. You see a lot of companies not protecting their balance sheet. You're not getting the return you can right now for what it costs to drill. So we're kind of entering a time right now. It almost makes more sense to acquire other companies as opposed to drill in terms of your cost of capital. The reason why we're drilling, you might think it's a little bit hypocritical, but our stock was at 10.5 cents, Rob. If we did a raise in the general market for $3 million, we would have had to raise probably 3 times as many shares, and our share price we would have had to raise at was 8 cents. And we probably had to have warrants out there at 12 cents. We would have created a lot of overhang, etc. We would have never raised a drill if it was, your normal run-of-the-mill financing. Now, what was really interesting was we did a deal with tech, so they gave us a premium on our shares. Plus, we did charity flow-through premium. So all of a sudden, we raised at 20.5 cents versus the 8 cents we would have done regularly. So now if I talk about cost of capital, for every dollar that we would have spent before, we get an extra 2 free dollars. So now it makes sense for us to drill. It was a really great deal for us and our shareholders. And one thing I always look at, if I'm an investor, you don't have a lot of time. Look, I tell my dad this all the time. He's a big junior mining investor, one of the reasons why I got in the industry, but you better know who the CEO is. If you don't know the CEO's name, I would never invest in a company. Know where the projects are. I think it's really weird when investors just invest in something because someone told them to. Yet they'll spend 6 hours researching a camera. They don't know who the CEO is or where the project is. And, another thing I look at, what's your G&A spend? It really throws me off when companies pay themselves a lot of money on the G&A and for salary. I was working at a big company before, Rob. I can make 2 to 3 times as much in terms of salary working for a major mining company. But this industry is fun. I love it. And there's a lot of upside. So where I get paid is I'm aligned with shareholders. If we sell the company someday, I make a lot of money, and so do my shareholders. But day to day, I'm just getting by in terms of the salary. But it really throws me off when people want to, eat their cake and have it too. And they're getting paid really big salaries. So I look, what does the CEO make? What does the chairman make of some of these junior companies? And to kind of compound that, which, I would never invest in a company where they pay, especially if you're a junior Canadian company, if you pay the CEO or the chairman or anyone on that company in US dollars, I feel like that's a way to kind of hoodwink investors to show what you pay, but they actually get a 40% free premium bump. If you're based in Toronto, why are you getting paid in US dollars? And I said before, Rob, I'm not going to throw any companies under the bus. If you want to go through the management information circle, you can see who pays himself in US dollars. I think it's complete BS, because really, I think any person that works for a company should be really aligned with the shareholders. And that's even more important with junior mining companies, where there's a lot more opportunity for the stock to go up or down.
Obviously, you meet a lot of people when you're networking in this industry, and obviously your involvement in the young mining professionals. Do you have any good stories that you can share with us around any mining executives? And I know that you have. So yeah, be good to hear.
I have some really good stories, actually. This industry is amazing. You get to travel the world, you get to help the world. the mining industry, they get such flack for ESG and all this stuff, but they've been doing it before everyone else. And, I worked at IAM Gold. They did so much for the community, so much for these different charities, so much for the people. They're great companies to work for. And really, all these guys that work for these companies, they all come up through the mining industry. And if you work in these mines, you got to be a people person, and like any leader for that matter, unless you're the founder of the company, you got to be a people person. So a lot of these CEOs, they're really gregarious guys. I can name a lot of stories about different people. I think a good story to talk about is Mark Bristow. If you look at Mark in the news, he runs Barrick. I would say probably between him and Robert Friedland, they're probably the two biggest names in the mining industry. They're very gregarious, good public speakers. But people are always afraid of the guys at top, the king, so to speak, and they're afraid to go near them, talk to them, etc. We run something called Young Mining Professionals of Toronto. We have a huge scholarship fund. We do awards. Barrick's been behind us every step of the way. And Mark actually came and spoke at an event of ours 2 months ago down in Toronto. So the funny story about that is, some of his people that work for him, they're always trying to make sure Mark's happy, and they're kind of edging around and making sure everything's perfect for Mark. He wants to eat this certain food. He wants to be seen at this certain place. So everyone's kind of at pins and needles because no one had met Mark. They've heard all these stories, scary guy, etc. He showed up. We've had many events, Rob. These CEOs show up maybe 20 minutes before the dinner starts, and they leave almost before dessert. Mark was the very first person to arrive at the dinner. He talked to all the different students, all the people. He looked you at the eyes. He felt like one of the people, like he was down there. And I would go to war with that guy. He didn't care what he drank. We just drank some J-Lore. He was fine with it, even though we had special wine for him. The one thing he did tell me, Rob, he goes, I want to play at every single table because I want to sit with every single people that's coming to watch me speak. And he got up. He spoke to everybody. We put students at his main table. And he was actually one of the last ones to leave. It was one of the latest events we had. I think we left at 11:30 because Mark was staying there and chatting with everyone so much. And that meant so much to us. And one of the reasons why I go to war with Mark, and which I think is Barrick's one of the best mining companies to invest in, you want to go where the great leaders are. He's super competitive. He got a great deal on that Newmont deal. He's out there. And he's making sure his mines are humming. But it's not just the mines. He cares about every facet of his business. And I told Mark, I go, listen, you're going to have two of the best students in all of Canada sitting at your table. I go, this one guy is going to another mining company. I think it'd be great for Barrick. And I go, this other guy doesn't have a job yet. He has perfect GPA across the board. I've been doing these scholarships for 5 years. I've never seen grades like this. And he's a good guy. So Mark emailed me the next day and he goes, send me the resumes of those guys you're talking about. So I emailed the individuals, said, guys, give me an updated resume. I sent it to Mark. Rob, I'm not joking you. I got a text from one of these students. He's sitting at Queens. He said, you wouldn't believe who just called me. I go, who? He goes, Mark Bristow just called my cell phone. I'm now going to Barrick. I'm not going to this other mining company. And that kind of shows you what kind of guy he is. Super competitive. He wants them to work for Barrick, but he also goes out of his way and he talks to these students. And, just to tell one more story about Mark, I was the MC of the event, and a really funny story about Mark. And I tell a lot of people this, and I'll tell you how the story ended, but I think we were trying to get scholarship money from Mark when they first joined our scholarship, and I knew he was going to be in London. So I was at the Northern Miner exhibit, and I went down after Mark finished speaking. I got right in his face. Like, I'm not afraid of anybody. I got right in Mark's face, and I probably scared him a little bit. And I said, Mark, like, we're looking for scholarship money, etc. And he said to me, yes, right on the spot, Rob. He says, we believe in the students. High tide raises all ships. Of course, we'll donate to your scholarship. And I said, this is great. I brought my wife. This is before we had kids, on the trip to London for the work event. And I had a day off, and I was going to hang out with my wife. And instead, what I did is I went to look for a gift from Mark because I wanted Mark to remember me. I want to make sure he remembered that he was going to give money to the scholarship. And I knew Mark liked hunting, and I found these really great Scotch glasses. And the Scotch glasses, Rob, had a little bullet right in the middle of them. And I said, I'm going to give these to Mark. He had an office in London. And I said, you know what, Tony? This isn't quite enough for Mark. Mark did this for you. Make it extra special. He probably already has these glasses. So I went down to Bond Street, the old silver district where they do all the engraving. And I tried to get someone to engrave his name in this bullet. So I wanted gold because gold's what they produce and gold is the ticker of Barrick, but I also want his last name, Bristow. Took about 2.5 hours. My wife was really upset with me because I was missing date night or something. It was a really hot day. I remember sweating. I couldn't find a place to engrave these bullets because it was such a small bullet. And one of my last stops is going to go to Rob. And it's a long story, but trust me, it's worth it at the end. I went down to the bottom of some store, and it was this old school store. And this old guy, looked like he's from a fairy tale, 85 years old. And this other guy walked in and opened the door for me. And he had a wooden leg. I remember this. And Chelsea just won the Champions League. And Chelsea kind of tattoo on his wooden leg. And I showed him the things. I go, can you guys engrave on this? And they had the old school engrave that no one has. So he engraved Mark and they engraved Bristow and gold on these glasses. Anyways, I dropped him off at his office, gave him to his EA. And at this time, Mark was answering my emails. I even gave me a cell to text him. Rob, I never heard from Mark after this until I saw him at the YMP event. And I was like, what happened? Like, he gave me the scholarship. He's not answering my emails. I go, what did I say to insult him? And I was talking to another lawyer in the mining industry, telling her the story. And she goes, Tony, you did what? I go, yeah, I gave him his name on the bullet, everything else. He goes, Rob, she goes to me, that's what the KGB do when they're trying to murder someone. So essentially I scared this guy off. So then I'm at the Young Mining event, and I had this story, and my chairman and the head of Northern Miner, they've told him the story before. They go, you got to tell the story to Mark. I go, I don't want to insult him. He's a really nice guy. He came. I don't want to say this in front of everyone. He goes, he's a really good sport. You should tell it to the whole group. So I told the whole story to everyone. Everyone was dying laughing. And what Mark said is, he said, I just had a really bad EA. I never even saw it. So he never even got in the first place. So all this time I told the story. He wasn't even afraid of me. He just didn't write me back because probably I was bothering him. But it kind of shows you the kind of guy he is. He's got a good sense of humor. He cares about the kids. I go to war with them. Barrick's a great company. They got a great future ahead of them, and they got a great leader.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great story, or a couple of stories there. And obviously mining does get a bad image, and I suppose that's people outside of the mining industry that don't know what mining is. So how can the mining industry improve their image? What can they do better?
The mining industry I mentioned earlier, they've been doing ESG and looking at the communities and doing great things for the world because they had to, for a lot longer than anyone else. But they don't really show off all the work they do. They spend millions of dollars on ESG, and I don't think they spread the word or do it together enough. So, they get a bad rep. So I think it's just a better job of just communicating to the world what they do. And I think, this day of age, who are the people that complain, people that say that mining companies aren't great? They're uninformed youth. And what do uninformed youth do? They're on TikTok, they're on Instagram. I always thought, look, a picture tells 1,000 words. And one thing the mining industry is great about is pictures, and they have really great things that site, etc. They should almost just have one central Instagram or TikTok that just shows all different companies together daily or weekly, and the great things that they do all over the world for people, communities, etc. Look, Kibali, which is another Barrick mine in the Congo, like they have a great egg farm there. I know IAM Gold is great things down in Suriname. I think it's just about showing the people what you do. Everyone has an iPhone. Everyone lives in a house that's probably made of steel. Most people have cars. So, I don't know, you need steel, you need silver, you need a lot of these products in order to do your day-to-day life. So, I was in Australia, and they had guys throwing eggs at people at one of these mining events. And one thing I was with someone, they did something really funny. They asked one of the picketers, they go, do you know what time it is? And the guy pulled out an iPhone, and he goes, do you know you have to mine everything in order to have that iPhone? So I just think people are a little bit uninformed. And even when it comes to the coal stuff with tech, and all these companies have to get rid of their coal, I don't understand that really. It's one thing's thermal coal and powering your electricity with thermal, but you need met coal. You need met coal in order to produce steel. 70% of the whole world's steel is produced because of met coal, coking coal. And without steel, you wouldn't have all those things I talked about before in terms of buildings, trucks, etc. 30% of the world's steel is made from recycling, but you need coal. Without coal, you don't have steel. So, what are we doing getting rid of that? Are you just trying to go move it to China and Indonesia and stuff where they don't care about the environment? I don't think having tech and other companies in North America produce met coal is such a bad thing. It produces a lot of cash. It helps give back to the communities and helps support the other projects they have for copper, et cetera, and some of these strategic metals. So, look, I think a lot of investors are kind of uninformed.
And following on from that, what are your thoughts around Glencore buying or buying tech or going to buy tech?
I don't think it's going to happen between Glencore and Teck. Look, I think the Keevil family has a controlling interest in Teck. For them, they're already rich. It's not about dollars and cents. Obviously it is, and that comes eventually, but it's about the culture. It's about what they've built as a legacy. And, big part of Vancouver is built on Teck, big part of BC, there's so many jobs, etc. Also, like as a junior mining company that's got money from Teck, like, man, that helped us out a lot. It helps the exploration industry to grow. It gives us that gives the mining industry their minor league system, so to speak, in order to grow. And look, Glencore, I believe, has different culture. They're in Switzerland. They're a different area. I'm not sure if they keep the head office in Vancouver. I'm also not sure how great their exploration is. From what I can tell, a lot of their money comes from their trading. So they like to take on assets that are already built. Those assets produce the money. And then what they do and why they make so much money, Rob, if you look at them, they had like a 4 or 5 PE last year. One of the reasons why they make so much money is because they're trading. So they leverage the metals they produce and they do a trading, and they get more margin per ounce or ton produced than any other company in the world. So I think they're just going to pillage and village and leave. And I think Teck's about more than just that. So I can't say Teck's not going to be bought by a different company. I just don't see the Glencore and Teck marriage happening. But again, I have no insight on that. I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me. I think Teck's probably the best mining company in the world when it comes to sustainability, culture, etc. And look no further. Look up a guy or girl that works at Teck. Look at their LinkedIn. Look how many companies they've worked at before. Look how long they've worked at Teck. 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So I just think it's absolutely insane that people stay at companies that long, which kind of speaks levels about how great their culture is, how great their people it is. And if you have people that like working for companies, those people will back each other up. You'll have a lot more effective, efficient people, and you will make a lot more money. So I think company culture starts and then success follows and money follows that. So I think just give Teck some time. I think they're a great company. Let them be.
Talking about obviously mergers, what are your thoughts on the Newcrest and Newmont merger?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of different thought processes on it. Newcrest many years ago got spun out of Newmont. I don't know if people know that. But if you look at that, investing in mid-tier companies, it's tough because you're essentially investing in a construction company. And in construction, especially with COVID and inflation, there's a lot of downsides. So there's a lot of beta there. There's a lot of chance for you to hurt your investment. So what you want to do, if you believe in gold, there's really 3 ways to invest, I think, at least if you're not looking for something risky. You invest in a major mining company, a company that's going to give you dividends, or you invest in an ETF, or you invest in physical gold. Physical gold gives you no yield. And I think the best thing to do is really invest in an EFT. But what Newcrest and Newmont merger is doing, they're essentially creating an ETF that gives you a yield, call it 2.5% yield. So now instead of investing in ETF that doesn't really give you a yield, you're investing in Newmont, Newcrest actually gives you a yield back, which makes it a lot more attractive for investors and for funds. And while I don't think that they will get the bump from the growth, because I don't even know how many ounces of gold they're going to produce a year, Rob, call it 7 million ounces of gold a year. To get a 10% bump in their production, they got to produce an extra 700,000 ounces of gold a year. Where do you get that from? So how do you get the increase your stock for your shareholders? And how you do that is increase the demand for your stock. And all of a sudden, a lot of those funds, they get away from investing in Barrick, Anglo Gold, Goldfields, even the ETFs. And all of a sudden, they put their money in this new Newmont, Newcrest co that's giving you a yield. And all of a sudden, because of the demand in the stock, you'll see an increase in the price of the stock. So I think that's a good thing for investors. If I'm going to invest in something, I probably would now invest in Newmont, Newcrest, or even a Barrick. I would leave alone a lot of those mid tiers that have a lot of that inherent risk, a lot of that construction risk. But one thing that a lot of people aren't really talking about as well, in terms of that merger, they look at adding those new ounces, but you got to look at, there's a lot of copper that Newcrest produces. But the biggest thing, Rob, this world is getting tougher and tougher to permit open pit mines, especially with the footprint and the tailings and everything else. So how do you get a lot of tonnage and a lot of ounces or pounds out of a mine without doing open pit? Well, you got to do it underground. And what technology is that? That's block cave mining, essentially having, bulk tonnage, but underground. And who's the best bulk tonnage miner, block cave miner in the world? It's Newcrest. Their mines in Australia, their mine in Papua New Guinea, those are block cave mines. And I believe that they have a special IP technology that no other companies have. So obviously, I think Newmont wanted to acquire the ounces, but I think one thing that they wanted to acquire was that technology that Newcrest has IP on in order to extract value from a lot of, the deposits that they have. And if you look at Newcrest and Newmont right now, and look at the Golden Triangle, well, gosh, if I was an exploration company in the Golden Triangle, I'd be a little bit worried because, their end game, like I mentioned earlier, for us is for a liquidity event, someone take them out. Now, Newcrest and Newmont essentially have cornered the Golden Triangle area with all these different deposits, and there's a lot less competition for people to take out those smaller companies like Brixton, etc. So I think there's a lot of reasons why I think that merger makes sense for growth, access to technology. Also, the fact I think they'll be one of the most attractive companies for funds to invest in, which I believe will create a lot of upwards movement in their stock.
I know you've been living at a mine site for a year now, and you seem to be a good storyteller. So I just wondered if you had any good stories about the experiences that you've had over the past year.
Yeah, so I lived in Suriname for a year. So when I started at IAM Gold, I went ass backwards into that industry. I got my CFA. I was looking to get a job either in banking or mining. And my uncle, who I spoke about, he said to me, Tony, he said, get into mining. He said, it's a fun industry. You can travel the world. You work with awesome people. And he goes, it never feels like a job because you're always putting out fires. It's kind of stressful, but you're always working on something. You're always problem solving. And even now, Rob, I told my father-in-law I don't really work much. And my wife got really mad at me because she said, Tony, you work all the time. It just doesn't feel like work because it's such an amazing industry. Anyways, my uncle kind of told me all that stuff. So I said, listen, I'll get into mining. I got into mining at IAM Gold. That's another, long story I can tell on another podcast, which is really funny. But after a year of working, I did some work in IR, etc. At IAM Gold, just analyst jobs. And, the guy who took me under his wing was a CEO named Steve Letwin. And, one of the reasons I think I'm okay at public speaking is because Steve was so good at public speaking. And he says, the one thing to set you apart from everything else is just to be a good public speaker. You think people are scared of heights or spiders? They're afraid of speaking even more. But he says, besides speaking, which you can always work on, he goes, if you ever want to make your way up in this industry, you got to go to site. He says the best fertilizer is the footsteps of the farmer. And unless you go to site, you won't understand anything about mining. And I didn't know anything about mining, Rob. And he goes, you got to go to Suriname. I thought Suriname was in Africa, for gosh sakes. How dumb did I feel? And they sent me to Suriname. And I remember reading this pamphlet before I was going to go. And it's funny because they have this pamphlet for the Rosebell Gold Mine. And it's really cool. There's 2,000 people live there. And they had a section about, all the facilities they have. They have a big gym there. They have a soccer field there. And when you live at a site that big, what you got to realize that it's like living at a summer camp. Like they got food there. They got a bar. They got like real life experiences. They got romance. And instead of actually going to camp and playing sports for the day, you do a great job you love, but you hang out with people you love afterwards as well. And you live in like these little boardrooms and they're fun. Anyways, this manual told me about all this stuff, but one of the things they told me about, and I love animals, I love National Geographic, all the animal section. So in the animal section, they're like, they have these pumas out at the site and these cougars. And one thing they said was they have these little things called, I think they're called arrow frogs, small little green frogs. And they said they're one of the most poisonous creatures in the world. If you step out, you can die. That's how much poison there is. The very next chapter, Rob, right after these things about the arrow frogs, they talked about how there's a nice outdoor area where you can run around the track. It's about 10 kilometers going in the jungle. I said, if there's these cougars and arrow frogs, I'm never going to be running out there. So I thought that was pretty ironic to have those two sections together. Anyways, I got flown out to Suriname and I remember landing there and you have to fly through Miami. Then you got to fly through Trinidad and your third flight goes into a place called Paramaribo in Suriname. And I land there and you get in at 2:30 in the morning and I had no clue where I was, Rob. And I was about 26 years old and I was pretty scared. And I remember getting there, and it was the first time I ever really saw a gun. I got picked up by two guys. I was the only one put in the van. The guy in the front had a gun. The other person was driving, and I'm driving in the middle of the jungle. And I was kind of scared. And the one thing that actually made me feel okay, and I was just reminiscing this the other day, they had a big billboard of Rhiannon the singer in the forest. And I was like, okay, I kind of felt like I was like out in the middle of like nowhere, but I kind of felt I was close to home seeing Rhiannon there for whatever reason. And I got into Paramaribo, so the Roosevelt camp at about 4 a.m. They had opened the doors at Sodexo for the camp for me. They gave me their keys and they said, you got to walk that way. And they pointed up the hill. And there's about 50 different barracks, long houses where all the people sleep at. And I was sleeping near the very top of the hill. And I remember getting out of the Sodexo office and walking out. It was complete dark out. And I remember walking, and all these bullfrogs were all around me. And it was almost like I was playing hopscotch, just trying to get around these bullfrogs to get to my room. And that was kind of the beginning of the experience. I spent a year there. I made a lot of friends. It was just an unbelievable experience. One thing I learned, Rob, too, is like, you just think of mining, you just think you're producing gold. That a mine is a giant machine, and a mine's like an army. It marches on its stomach, and you really start to really appreciate every single person that works there. There are people that just cut down trees just to make roads, just to have access to mines. The people that worked at the Sodexo kitchen, the people that work at the kitchen, they're so important. If they go on strike, that mine is closed. So they're very important. Also drilling. People think about drilling. They only think about the exploration drilling, but you also have to do drilling before you produce, because you have an idea of where the gold is. But then instead of doing 800-meter drill holes, you do 6-meter drill holes. So you got to figure out where on that pad the drilling is. So what part you have to bring to waste, what part you have to bring to the mill. So all those little things. Another thing too is just picking up the gold. Now, if I ever watch a movie about stealing gold from a bank vault or something, one thing that drives me crazy, if people are picking up that gold and they're throwing it to someone, well, you got to realize is gold is about 19 times heavier than water. So, the average person can't even hold a brick of gold. And they always say at the Roosevelt gold mine, if you can pick up this brick of gold with one hand, you can have it. And it doesn't even come close. So those are all little small things that I learned. It was just an absolutely amazing experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And it really kind of helped me understand the mining industry, but also kind of really appreciate every little person that works there. So as well, like health and safety, you start to realize why everyone takes health and safety so seriously, because it is so easy to die at a mine site, and there are a lot of deaths that happen. So when people say health and safety is the most important thing, like it really is, because it's extremely dangerous there, and there are very little fatalities at Roosevelt, which kind of speaks volumes to how great the health and safety is at IAM Gold.
Yeah, I appreciate those stories. You're obviously investor in the junior mining space. So what do you think investors should be looking out for in terms of when they're looking to invest in a company?
Cash. How much cash do you have? I always think it's good to at least have 2 years of cash. Do you have enough cash to cover your current program? And do you have enough cash to at least cover a bit of your program and your drilling and your G&A for, the next 2 years? So that's the first thing I look at. If you got no cash, you can't do anything. My number one job, I realize it's to look after the company first. Make sure your balance sheet is strong. You're looking after your company. So that's the number one important thing. You can have a great asset, but if you have no cash, you can't do anything with it. And a lot of times companies, big or small, leave themselves in very precarious positions where they don't have enough cash. They can't carry up their operations. They got to sell assets, etc. So the one thing I'd always look at is cash and how much of a burn rate you have. And I'm quite happy to know that we have at least 2 years of burn rate, 1 year at least of full exploration, another year to bring us all the way through the end of 2024. So that's the first thing to look at. Again, I look at the US dollars thing. That's a small thing, but if you look after your nickels, the pennies, the nickels look after themselves, and it shows you a bit about the culture and how that management team is. So I don't ever want to see a Canadian or US or Australian company ever pay themselves with US dollars, because I think they're always kind of doing a little bit of a bait and switch when they're doing that. Another thing that I look at, for me, it's so tough to find a deposit. It's like a 1 in 5,000 chance. I don't want to lose that deposit because I'm in a risky jurisdiction. For me as an investor, I'll only invest in Australia or Canada, Western world, because quite frankly, there's not a lot of mines in Europe. And I don't really want to lose, that mine if it's in a jurisdiction in Africa or South America. I'm not saying I don't like those places, but I find the jurisdictions, the governments are really tough. They can take a mine at any time. So if I'm going to spend 5 years and, $50 to $100 million to come up with a deposit, I sure as heck don't want a government to take it away.
Obviously, we spoke about mining as a brand, and outside of the mining industry, the brand of mining isn't great. What would you say the biggest misconception people have about the mining industry?
People just don't want to know how their sausage is made, you need mining unless you're living underneath a tree in the middle of the forest and foraging your food day to day. Like, you need mining, you need agriculture, you need mining. So, it's not about not mining, it's about doing it in the most sustainable way. And what kind of upsets me too is you got a lot of lobbyists that are against mining in Canada, mining in Australia, mining in the USA, but the US, the Canada, a lot of these Western companies, they want electrification. Well, if you need electrification, you need copper, you need lithium, you need steel. Where's that steel getting made? It's making Coca-Cola, like I mentioned, and where is that getting produced? I don't want to say the same story over and over again, but I just got approached by Greenpeace, and they wanted us to protect the tigers in Indonesia. And I love the tigers in Indonesia. I've never met one, but I'm sure they're great, and I'm all about protecting them. But at the same time, we want to, get rid of our mining industry in some of these countries, or not get rid of it, but not have some of the mines get built, etc. But where's this copper? Where's this steel? Where's this coal? Where's this nickel going to get produced? Well, again, it's like the sausage industry. People want it to be produced away from them. They don't want to think about where it's produced. So they want it produced in Indonesian jungle, where those tigers are, by the way, that I had to donate to, or they want it produced in China. They want it produced in Russia, kind of, out of their realms. They don't see it, turn a blind eye on it. But those places, I'm telling you right now, they don't care about sustainability. They don't care about the environment nearly as much as Canada, nearly as much as the Western companies do. So, I always think we have one roof here. We have one world. We have one ecosystem. If you have a mine, you're going to build some mines, build it in a sustainable way, but keep them in Canada, keep the jobs here, keep the money here, and make sure when the coal is produced, when the copper is produced, it's done in a very sustainable way. Canada gets a bad rep because it takes a lot longer to get a permit, but guess what? It may take 3 or 4 years longer to get a permit or to build that mine, but they're doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it to, mine as sustainably as possible. And guess what? Once that company has that mine mining, it's going to mine for a very long time till the end of life. So I think people just have to stop reading titles and headlines and just start really understanding, the crux of mining, where you're producing instead of Canada, because guess what? You need that mining. So, I think that's kind of the misconception. And that's partly to rely on the mining industry. Like I mentioned earlier, they don't do a good enough job talking about what they do. Look at the celebrities. Look at these basketball players. They go and give to like hospitals and stuff. They bring a big camera crew with them. Everyone on Twitter, all the 30 million Instagram followers, they know that they give to these hospitals. And I'm happy they give to these hospitals. I'm happy they show people they invest in these hospitals, because you know what? If an NBA basketball player invests in these hospitals, then other people will too. But I think the mining company's got to take a bit of a page out of a lot of these Instagram influencers. And when they go and give to people in hospitals and communities and build farms and at schools, etc., they should bring cameras everywhere they go, and they got to show people. And not just about showing people. These guys will have Twitter they don't have nearly as many Twitter followers as a lot of these influencers. So what, the IAM Golds, the Barracks, the Ken Rosses, the Techs, everywhere, they got to find a way to have distribution to show the world the great job that they're doing in the mining industry and the world. Because if everyone starts to understand what they're doing, I think people will, lobby a little bit less against miners.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there in what you said there. Especially these influencers. Maybe the mining industry needs to employ a few for obviously people outside of the mining industry to basically tell the non-mining people a little bit more about the industry and what benefit is needed, why is mining needed for a start, and the good things that the mining industry does for local communities, i.e. build schools, build hospitals, because no one knows that outside of mining.
It's absolutely amazing. All the stuff that I've seen that the mining industry has done. So yeah, I love it.
And lastly, what's the outlook for American Eagle Gold for the remainder of the year going into next year?
Blue sky, blue sky, blue sky, Rob. No financing ahead of us, just drilling ahead of us. Hopefully copper has a little bit of rebound and get some headwinds that way. But we'll be drilling starting in a couple weeks. Today's, close to the end of May. We're looking to put the drills in the ground around June 10th. So from June 10th until, minimum June, July, August, September, June, July, August, September, till the end of September, we're going to be drilling. So, we have at least 4 months of drilling, which means we have another 5 months of assays to come out, and every hole could be that $1 billion hole. We got a really great team in a great jurisdiction. We have guys running our program that have found deposits before. They know what to do. We have a great company in tech that believes in us, that showed the world that they gave us money when they didn't have to, that believe in our property, believe in our people. So we got a lot of upside. I just say, follow the story, tell your friends about it, and just do your research. I'm not saying, put all your money in a junior mining company, but, there's a certain amount of money, I think a certain risk portfolio should put in junior miners. We just want to be that small part of your portfolio. I'm fighting over the 5% that you're hopefully putting in those risk portfolios. Because what I want to do with investors is get them the 10, 20, 100x. And if you do that, it makes up for all the other losses you make in your portfolio in the S&P, et cetera. So follow American Eagle. We have a lot of drilling, a lot of news coming up in the near future.
Yeah. Tony, really appreciate your time in obviously telling us a little about obviously American Eagle, and also some of obviously the stories that you've encountered during your career. Really enjoyed that, and it was and hopefully the audience enjoyed those stories as well. So it'd be great if you can come back on later on in the year and to come on the podcast, and obviously you might be able to give us those brilliant drill results later on this year. So yeah, we'd like you to obviously come back on and share some more stories, and obviously give us those results.
Well, Rob, thanks a lot for having me. Remind me to tell you the Starbucks story next time, is how I got into the mining industry. But look, I really appreciate your time. You're a great interviewer. You got a great headhunting consulting business going on. I just want everyone to know, just read up about our company. It's American Eagle, AE on TSX Venture. Please follow us. We got a lot of news, and thank you very much for, listening to me speak about the company and some of the stories I have. Yeah, and we include those all in the show notes as well. So for easy access for people to reach out to you and have if they've got any questions, obviously they can ask you. So all the best for the remainder of the year. Thanks, Rob. No worries. And those that are listening, I hope you enjoyed the episode. This episode definitely needs to be shared. Obviously, Tony gave some examples of stories that he's experienced in the mining industry. So for people that are not in the mining industry, they need to listen to this, because whatever impression they have of the mining industry, Tony's flipped it on its head and gave a completely different image of what the mining industry is, and some of the things that he's been up to, and the excitement. As you can see, he's passionate about what he does, and obviously the stories speak for themselves. So please share this episode to obviously people within the mining industry, but more importantly, people outside of the mining industry, and so they can understand what mining is, what a great industry it is, and even whatever they're doing, maybe consider an opportunity in the mining industry. So appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes, and until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.